want to show is that right after the war, after the the lack of stress, the better living improvements, is when the disease rate went down. And this year is just the same compared to other countries. This is in England and Wales, and this is on the deaths of children under the age of 15, and it's attributed to scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, and measles. And this shows that there were 6,000 deaths per million children in the 1870s, and that between here and 1940 there was a 90% decline. And this is when they introduced the vaccines for diphtheria and antibiotics. And once again, it shows that after the war, a lack of stress and better living conditions.
In 1982, a geographic map showed that Alaska, Canada, United States, Greenland, Mexico, South America, Australia, and New Zealand had the lowest rate of hepatitis B cases compared to the rest of the world. According to the Scientific American, Alaska had only 0 to 0.5% of hepatitis B infection. The U.S. government, however, had geared up to vaccinate 100% of the indigenous people of Alaska, with implementing an experimental plasma-based hepatitis B vaccine. Plasma-based is blood. Several years later, because of risk factors, i.e. AIDS, the hepatitis B recombinant DNA, which was a new vaccine, was introduced in 1988 to our ethnic group. But this vaccine also has AIDS, and if you understand what the AIDS virus is, it's so tiny that where did they get that hepatitis germ? They got it from the blood of a person who is prone to hepatitis B, which we have found contain, HIV or the AIDS virus.
Okay, this is the map that Marianne was talking about. Now, this map was drawn or shown in 1982, and what we wanted to point out is that the highest areas, like 6 to 10% of the population that had hepatitis B, is the red area, and this shows 3 to 5% of the population. And in Alaska, there was 0 to 0.5% of hepatitis B in Alaska. And then also in 1991, in the American Scientific, they have the same picture, and it shows the same, that there was 0 to 0.5% of hepatitis B in Alaska. So there was never an epidemic in Alaska. But they told the people there was, and they went in and vaccinated nearly 80% of them with the hepatitis B. There are a few other pictures that I wanted to show you here, because they're wanting to do a hepatitis A vaccine, just as Marianne mentioned on the rosebud in Alaska. In Alaska, between 1986 and 1991, we had 61% of those who had hepatitis A was Alaskan natives, 31% were non-natives. And the significance here shows that if you go to the village, out of 27 villages, there were 208 cases of hepatitis A. And these were villages that used honey buckets. And those honey buckets are what they use in their homes because they don't have toilets and stuff, and they haul them out and dump them someplace. Out of 15 villages, there are 82 cases, and that is with flush toilets. And there's like a 1/3 increase of hepatitis A in villages with honey buckets. Okay, and then some other things that we wanted to point out was the high suicide rate amongst the indigenous people. This year was done in 1987, and they had done, this year it was a week series, 7 consecutive days they did a story on the indigenous people and on because of the high suicide rate. And we had a high suicide rate before, but it got so overwhelming that they had to, they came and did this story. Well, for the ages between 15 and 19, for the Alaskan males, there were 105 suicides per 100,000. And there were 32 for non-natives and 25 for Alaskan Native women. From ages 20 to 24, there were 257 suicides per 100,000, compared to 44 for non-natives, and 78 for Alaskan Native women, compared to 11 for non-natives. For the ages 25 to 29, there were 178 cases of suicide per 100,000, and 35 for the Alaskan Native men. And there's also a high cancer rate. Now, why I wanted to show this is because after the homosexuals had first received the hepatitis B, they had an extremely high amount of suicides, and that's what we found with the Alaskan Indigenous people, that right after the hepatitis B, the suicides went crazy. The mental health, we only had a street crowd, and after that it went to an explosion, which was seen, that's what they call dementia, but that was seen also with the homosexuals. Okay, and these are some of the future projects which have already been funded, that they're trying to find vaccines or some type of drugs. They have targeted Alaska because of the isolation of the villages. Most of the villages could have anywhere from 100 people to 400 to 700 people. And because it takes an airplane or a boat to get to them, it's real easy to control them, to see who leaves or not, so it's an easy control group. But some of the new projects are more future hepatitis B, the rheumatic fever, hemophilia influenza, arthritis, streptococcus pneumonia, cancer, chronic persistent viruses, anemia, rheumatic heart disease, diabetes, and others. Okay, and then I want to do a comparison here, and I don't know if any of you have heard of the Tuskegee project that was done on the Afro-Americans down in Macon County. Well, these are some of the similarities that happened to them compared to what's happening to the Alaskan Natives. The PHS is the one who funded it and ran it, and Alaska Native Service, which is also federally funded, is the one who ran it. And what we got here is that it shows why they did this here. Okay, on here the doctors, for the Tuskegee, the doctors sought to chart the natural course of the disease, and this is where they had found a cure for syphilis, the government did. And what they did with this group of people is they let the syphilis run wild without giving them any cure, to see what would happen, and to chart the natural course of the disease. And several men had died because of it. And with the Alaskan Native, their reason for doing the hepatitis B was that large gaps exist in our knowledge about the natural history of HBV, and additional information would be useful in developing programs that use vaccines to prevent HBV. And what they did is they went into the villages in the 1970s and they targeted over 1,000 people, and they picked out children, babies, women, adults, everybody. They targeted them, and out of them there was 189 that came down, became chronic carriers of hepatitis B. Okay, then in Tuskegee, the doctors, what they did is they chose, the doctors told the men, who were mostly unschooled sharecroppers, that they were being treated for bad blood. Well, the doctors came and told the Alaskan Natives that because we were Alaskan Natives, we have a high rate of hepatitis B infection and liver cancer. As from the graph we showed you before, there was no hepatitis B here. But yet they came and that's what they told the people. And what they did, the doctors who performed the autopsies and the nurse who did the roundup for examinations were Afro-Americans. They picked people out of their own community so that they wouldn't, because they didn't trust anybody, so they picked people who they thought they could trust. And then with the Alaskan Natives, they picked indigenous women of the communities who were chosen, and they were given up to 6 weeks of training to become health aides. Some of them didn't even get 6 weeks, they got less. But they chose them too because they felt like they could communicate, they could talk, speak the language, and the people trusted them. Okay, and this here is on the letters that they had sent out to the men in Tuskegee. And the letters that they sent to Tuskegee was that they said that some time ago you were given a thorough examination, and since that time you have gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. And then the letter ended. Remember, this is your last chance for special free treatment. Well, this is what they told us, the letter they sent us. Okay, the hepatitis B vaccination are available to you at the Denina Health Clinic. Because you qualify for ANS benefits, you can be screened and immunized at no cost to you. This service is scheduled for this year only. And then the letter ended. Without this program, the cost of the vaccination will cost $100. We urge you to take advantage of this program now. Okay, down here, the PHS offered $100 for burial service for any of the men who took part in the Tuskegee study, which is interesting because they offered us bingo cards after you got your hepatitis B. And I also find it interesting because it saved us $100 by getting the hepatitis B, and down here they received $100 for their burial insurance. Okay, and last year, the head of the, when they finally decided to do this study here, the head of the VD division, Telford Clark, referred to Macon County as a natural laboratory. Well, in the Arctic research book, this is the U.S. policy over Alaskan natives that states that they refer to us as a natural laboratory. So there is similarities, and these Tuskegee people did take this to court and proved their case that it wasn't, and they called it controlled genocide, and they did receive some money for this, but not very much.
Just this month, this was just 1993 in September, we received or read another article about another new trial hepatitis B vaccine called FIAU that was introduced to a group of 24 volunteers. The horror of this vaccine was that it was killing the volunteers even after months after they stopped taking it. And if the hepatitis B plasma-based and the hepatitis B recombinant DNA vaccine was so safe and worked, why are they making yet another new vaccine? It is ironic that President Clinton, in his attempt to cut health costs and to health reform, plans to mandate or impose innocent, economically disadvantaged children and discriminately others to the unscientific health practice of mass vaccination programs. And we also read where they want to make the hepatitis B vaccination program the 6th childhood vaccine before a child enters into school.
It's for all children
For all
in the
children.
United States.
We are the proof that these and other programs have failed, and they failed us miserably. We can affirm that the indigenous people of Alaska are sick of being experimented on and targeting the Eskimos, Indian, and Aleut people with experimental vaccine and designer drugs, which many are calling premeditated genocide or ethnic cleansing. In the 1950s, the U.S. government and their cohorts experimented on Yupik Eskimos, Indians in isolated parts of Alaska with high amounts of radioactive iodine. When they resumed it again, then they resumed it again in the 1970s. This study was done without the knowledge or consent of the subjects. They didn't even know what was happening. And today, most of the subjects have died of cancer. In August 1993, we received a news brief which states that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control invited a team from Mayo, Rochester, to seek clues to a puzzling illness in Alaska. The puzzling illness was a result of 40 years studying Eskimos, Indians, and Aleuts in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta for low levels of red blood cells and high levels found in 70% of the stool samples taken. Could this be a result of radioactivity experimentation or trial vaccines? Some scientists and doctors we are talking to are calling it genocide, but Dr. Alquist calls the study, quote, an incredible experience, the fascinating culture, a challenging medical problem which could lead to the discovery of a new disease. The magnificent physical environment, it's an opportunity of a lifetime, and I feel real privilege to participate in it. Since the introduction of public health or Indian Health Service, our ethnic group now suffers the highest disease rate in the nation. Today, we rely on our elders and our traditional healers. We have asked them if they were ever as sick as their grandchildren or great-grandchildren are today. Their reply is no. They were much healthier and than their grandchildren or great-grandchildren are today. We are researching into the natural immunity, and we are researching and we're using traditional medicines which have been passed down to us by our generations of medicine people and our generations of grandparents, and we find that they're working. We realize certain conditions such as stress, poor nutrition, environmental pollutants, and Alaska has many of them because we don't have the restrictions that the people in the United States or the South 48 has regarding the drilling of oil or any other industry. We're also being prevented our right to subsist or to go out and gather the foods that our bodies have always thrived with, like fish and moose and even our medicine plants. They want to make traditional medicines and illegal to possess. They're going into like the doctors who use medicine plants or the not the allopathy, but the holistic medicines. We believe that vaccines are also causing activation of disease. We know that there are many ways to promote healing. The healing process begins with thought, as thought is the beginning of reality. Thought is powerful, and so we're really careful of what we think and how we think. Our thoughts are always to bring goodness, health, and honesty to our children and to the human race. The traditional NAES have always showed proper respect to all living things that exist, and that our Creator gave all of us the right to choose what is best for us. The Dena elders maintain that all individuals have the ultimate decision to choose and be completely informed of what is put into their body or their children's for whom they are responsible. Next month, October 9th and 10th, 1993, the Dena tribe and other Alaskan indigenous people are sponsoring an alternative and community development health conference. And that's going to be held in Anchorage, Alaska. The health conference will include local, national, and internationally known doctors, scientists, researchers, spiritual healers, and traditional healers. The purpose of this conference is to share information, healing techniques, promote networking and to bring the disease and infant mortality rate down amongst the indigenous people and all human beings. So we, at this point, we didn't realize it was going to be such a monumental event. We've been getting calls from all around the world and from all around Alaska, the bush communities, and from just even in the United States and so forth. And so we are trying to do some fundraising also at this point.
Is it going to be broadcasted in any way or aired?
There's going to be it's going to be documented with a group out of Hollywood. And also a documentary group from Australia. We hope that we won't be getting coverage. We have been in contact with CNN. They seem interested, but we haven't had any firm yes or no. We believe our newspapers will be covering this health conference.
I don't know if you're aware of the recent news story that the last existing smallpox virus is in a laboratory somewhere, and they're contemplating whether or not to destroy this last existing smallpox virus, which means that there would not be any more smallpox virus in the whole world. And I wonder if you mind commenting on the control of smallpox and whether or not you believe this story. Or if you've heard about it.
Well, I have not heard about it, but you know, I believe that the next great war, and it has probably been going on for quite a while, is not the atom bomb. I believe it's biological warfare, and I believe we're right in the middle of it. So I don't think they would get rid of the smallpox germ.
I think it's a new vaccine. Let's develop another vaccine, because there's big money in developing vaccines. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
See, and that's really kind of interesting that you asked, because in Who Murdered Africa by Dr. William Campbell Douglas, they were vaccinating the indigenous people of Africa with the smallpox vaccine. And they say that they have it eradicated, but they just, Yves Stallat, the scientist from Finland, said that they just merely call it another name.
And a lot of times the disease still exists, but they just rename it and say, oh, it's a new disease.
We've eradicated it.
Yeah, there's some people who believe that HIV is a strain of syphilis, that it's a
Yeah.
reaction to penicillin use, and that's what HIV actually is, a virulent form of syphilis. It has a lot of the same, the dementia and all that kind of stuff is very, very similar to syphilis.
Yeah, there was a correlation that you drew between the advent of the Hepatitis B vaccine and incidences of dementia and so forth. There was a letter, I think it was a William Stricker, that drew the correlation between the Hepatitis B vaccination in the gay community and the incidences of AIDS, and also the smallpox and hepatitis B vaccination program in Africa and the widespread incidences of AIDS that are now occurring in Africa. Can you possibly comment on that?
The strain in Africa, the AIDS strain in Africa is a little bit different than the strain in America, but it's, you know, AIDS is AIDS and dead is dead. And what the scientists and doctors mentioned in their article is that they are putting these diseases right into the vaccine. And of course you have programs like UNICEF and so forth that are saying, oh, we need to help these poor people in this third world countries. And by the way, Bush, Alaska is considered a third world country because we're so deprived.
Yeah, what all you really need to do is clean it up.
Clean it.
Put some running water and some type of sanitation in there.
So
I would like to comment on blood, the politics of blood, because there's a definite politics of blood. I'm sure as many of you know that for a long time, if you were a drug addict or a drunk, one quick way to get $40 on a Saturday night was to sell your blood. So for at least 20 years, the blood supplies of the United States of America have been supplied by drunks and drug addicts. I know because I used to sell my blood. And I saw the people I sold blood with. And quite frankly, I wouldn't accept blood from any place, anywhere, unless it's my best friend who comes to donate specifically for me because that's the right blood type. And they have not they did not, and not until 1985 did they ever screen blood for disease. So you could have had, as I did, back surgery in 1985, and I was at that point given public blood. So, you know, I get tested every 6 months for the AIDS virus because it is very possible that I got tainted blood. And, you know, even getting tested is not necessarily a guarantee that you're free of the AIDS virus. That's why I encourage everybody, get that latex out and use it. Because my very close friend Teddy tested negative for 5 years in a row, and he died in 2 weeks of AIDS. So, I mean, their tests actually, I've heard some scientific evidence that the test does not actually say whether or not you have AIDS necessarily.
It doesn't until it's activated.
Yeah.
Like dormant
So you can be
20 years.
carrying the virus and not even be aware of it.
But another comment on that too that we found is that many times they frighten people, and you know, like we brought out before, the mind has a lot to do with health, with the health of a person. It's, for instance, an example is, oh, you have cancer. I'm sorry to tell you you have cancer, but you know, let's say it's a curable cancer and the person dies in 2 weeks. That's the mind and playing closing the body down. The mind is very, very powerful. Now, at our health conference, we have this doctor who has been researching into AIDS. His grandchildren are little Indian babies, and we know that there's a cure for AIDS, and that's what he's going to be speaking on, are alternative treatments and cures for AIDS. Now, this isn't in the last stages, but this is for those who test for HIV, and as most people know, that AZT doesn't work. That's not what it's killing people, it's killing the body, it's making it sick.
As a matter of fact, in some cases, it triggers the AIDS to take over even faster.
And there's evidence that chemotherapy, well, I have a friend who's a cancer researcher, and she says if you get cancer, do not take chemotherapy. It's making tons and tons of money for the chemical companies, and it does not help. It doesn't do anything at all.
No, watch your, you know, it's mainly, it's cleaning up your diet, you know, trying to eat as healthy as you can, no sweets. If you are fortunate enough to know people in the traditional medicines, not the quackeries, you know, not the snake oil people, but those who know their herbs, who know their medicine plants, their traditional healers, we're finding, you know, that these things work good, but a lot of it is your mind, your diet, what you put in your body.
Are you getting anybody at all communicating with our government right at this point, with Clinton, with what's going on with all this?
We have spent, you know, this is 7 years of ongoing investigation, and we testified to the Senate Select Committee on Indian Affairs. We have written, we have told the senators. Matter of fact, when I testified at the Senate Select Committee, our senators who were pushing the Hepatitis B vaccine got up and left before I even spoke. They saw me and get up, and they both left.
When was that?
That was in 1989 and 1990. And so what we have done is we have no confidence in the federal government. We believe that they are doing this to us because at first we couldn't figure out why, but we have since found the title of Alaska is still vested with the indigenous people. We found what was called the Kozlitzoff Memorandum. And maybe if they get rid of the indigenous people, then they have no problem with the title of
Okay,
Alaska.
have you any information about all these people now who are speaking out for their own, how can I say this? For their own cultures, for their own identity, for their own sovereignty, not only in this country, of course, but everywhere else. But there are people in this country, and there are groups getting together. Does this work anyway with you people? Are you into that too, or?
Yes, matter of fact, that's why we are here. You know. There's some pretty powerful women here, and it's just been an opportunity, and you're here, everybody here, you know. Yes.
Yeah, my question, and I'm directing to Sister from Daybreak Star, and all the sisters in general. I mean, it's kind of in line with what this lady was saying. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they were coming from, she was a European American woman. She was coming from the myth, well, there are no more Indians. And it was like, first of all, I have to discuss it down and say that's not true. Okay, but now, first of all, I want to say, one thing I want to say, the fact that you were here, and the fact that you were addressing like some of the issues that the sister from Daybreak Star addressed with regards to self-esteem and so forth, that you're beginning that work, and it's beginning to take root in your community. I think it makes room for other peoples to make that progression, because the original triad, the Anglos, the Africans, and the indigenous people, right? So y'all were first. And again, you were first. So now, that being said, this is stolen land. And how do you view the act of thievery? Is there something to discuss? Do you understand my question? Now, I mean, is it, are there terms upon which the thief can hold onto the spoils in your mind, or is it something that has to eventually be given back?
No, it has to be given, it has to be, well, first of all, we are only caretakers, but the United States has got to let go, because if you look at what's happening in the United States, it's a direct result of a decaying government. So we believe that, this is why we chartered under the Universal Doctrine of Human Rights. It's because we know how to govern. We know how to share. We had societies, and we're bringing them back, that function very good. And so we would like to share it with those who have peacefully integrated into our human tribal societies. And that's the only way the world is going to heal in our eyes. That's how we were taught.
Okay, Puerto Rico's trying, Hawaii, I hear, is trying.
Yes, we work real close with
Good.
Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah. Puerto Rico, we have not yet, but we didn't know that they were trying.
Oh,
We
yeah.
certainly
They're supposed to
will.
have a vote, I think, in November. If they don't rig it, they might get their independence.
Well, then they better really watch hard for the CIA coming
Yeah,
in, because
right.
we've been finding that's what disrupts human beings, and our culture is based on respect. We
Particularly because Puerto Rico, like Hawaii, is seen as the Anglo R&R spot.
Vacation spot,
It's
same
like
with
on the
Alaska.
East Coast, you go to Puerto Rico to get a suntan, and on the West Coast, you go to Hawaii. So, I mean, that whole, part of what the trouble with colonization is it isn't just this issue or that issue. Colonization grasps the entire earth, and my viewpoint of what's happening is that there are indigenous people and our allies who aren't necessarily always indigenous. I mean, it's, you can't judge someone by their skin color. And then there's the colonizers and their allies, and it's a life and death struggle, in my opinion.
Exactly.
And if the colonizers win, then everyone will die, except those people who have little underground tunnels like Clinton and go off. I don't know what they'll eat, freeze-dried peas or something for 2 years. But that struggle comes on many fronts, and I think one of the difficulties that we have as indigenous people all over the world is that the minute we get them to stop giving us this vaccine here, we find out they're dropping poisoned meat on us over there, or they're doing this to us here, and they're doing that to us there, or they say we can't have freedom of religion. And so it's like, I almost feel like if you become a native person you're born into being a warrior. I mean, there's nothing else, you know, if you're paying attention, that's what you have to do, is fight on as many, you know, and many of us are very tired as a result. I mean, our average lifespan is 47 years old. I'm supposed to die this year according to the American government, you know, and it's like, I'm gonna make it.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, that, I agree. Go ahead.
My question to you is, do you have any information about what you read to us? Any?
We have file cabinets of
Is there any
information.
information, get a copy of it or something?
Yes.
Well, we gave just Tina.
Yeah, and actually I wanted to make a comment on it. They have a packet of information and it's over there on the table. So if you want to take a look at it, we could make copies for the forum, but next week at the letter writing day, we're going to have copies so we can make it to the letter writing day. Okay, but we'll just give us a call and let us know. What we can try and get that to you, but there is a packet of information on the table. So if you're interested, just let us know about that, or try to come next Saturday, and there'll be packets available.
And what can we do to start the vaccination? Anything?
Sure, letter writing, maybe.
Talk to friends.
Talk to
I mean, every
friends.
time you hear this kind of stuff, tell as many people as you can about it.
That's the
Because
best.
how things change is because everyone understands what is going on and becomes outraged. You know, that's really the only weapon we have, since we don't have a radio show that reaches, 2 million people or whatever.
Right, and it's really hard for Indigenous people to, even get into the press. It's, I went to they had a meeting regarding subsistence, or this fishing board calls it. I go there to testify, and I was told even before I testified by one of the board members, I don't know why you're here. You Indians are nothing but, you're less than second-class citizens. You have no rights, and that's not my problem, that's yours. So the attitude towards the Indigenous people is not only very cutting, but it's no one else on that 20-member board said a word. It's very insensitive, but what they don't realize, it always comes back to them. That's just the way that this works. And it's, at first when we found this information, we were very devastated. And Bernadine and I talked to one of our elders who knows all of our stories, and he was teaching us, our stories and the meaning behind them, our language. And we had told him about this, and he said, we have a story about this, a prophecy about this, where they try to poison all of our people. He said, but they won't do it. They can't do it. We win. That's when we'll get our land back. That's when we can make our things right. And so, we know that things are not over with yet.
Oh, no.
And so, we're just appealing to humanity to understand and to help.
I was wondering, this recent, the limited news you get from, the limited information you get from the news about this thing that happened in Mexico, New Mexico and Arizona with the, with the Indigenous people there. If anyone besides the federal government was investigating that.
Yes, we have doctors on that, and they said it reeks with not only suspicion, but they believe that it's from...
Part of what's really important to know about that situation is that, radiation sickness has certain clear-cut symptoms, nausea, death after 2 weeks, nobody can tell why. And this disease that is supposed to come from rats bears a very uncanny resemblance to radiation sickness. And of course, in the Four Corners, they've been mining uranium. People there build their houses out of uranium pilings. Lots and lots of Navajo and Hopi men have worked in these mines, and I'm convinced, at any rate, that what's happening there is radiation sickness. And and the media has very cleverly made it into this, you know, Indian disease, you know, so of course now the reaction to that is
For
that.
about 2 weeks, and then it disappeared. And then
Right, so
died.
now Navajo and Hopi people can't get coffee in the restaurant and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, you know, I'm very light-skinned, so I normally don't get too much shit on the streets, but when I was in Arizona, they wouldn't serve me in an all-night cafe, you know, the waitress came up and said, we're closed, and I was not too, you know, I was really young, and I said, but you're a 24-hour cafe, how can you be closed? And it's like all these people started staring at me, I looked out, and there's all these trucks with rifles, and I said, I don't want any coffee today. You know, so I mean, it's like Arizona's a real strange place. It's, you know, Winnipeg's another place like that, where, you know, I don't know what's happening in those particular places, but the racism is pretty intense. And, you know, that's where, Arizona is where people still get shot. There's no investigation, you know, it's just another Indian person is dead. And that's quite common, it never gets in the newspapers. And that's not just me talking off the top of my head, I mean, I have friends who are dead.
Could you comment on your boarding schools? I didn't quite understand that. You said this goes all the way back to your father, and the boarding school thing is that fund, that's United States funded, and is that it? Or is that
What happened is that there was a program prior to my father's generation which claimed to want to civilize us and make it possible for us to assimilate into Western culture. So children were usually taken away from their families from anywhere from 5 to 9. Those were the time periods. You got beaten for speaking your language. You were usually brutalized in many different ways. And one of the things that in traditional life, children aren't hit. You know, a traditional mother can look at her child and the child just stops doing whatever they're doing. It's just a look and they know it's time to quit that little routine. And so there's not the kind of violence that particularly British child-rearing practices encourage, you know, where you beat a child practically to death so that they won't put their elbows on the table or something. And there's a lot more touching in traditional families. So children are constantly on someone's lap, not necessarily their mother's. And there's a different value about child rearing, so that in this situation we're in tonight, if there's a child running around, we're all responsible for not letting the child jump off a 30-foot wall, or, you know, everyone keeps an eye out on the child, not just mom. And so we have a more cooperative sense of how to take care of children. And when children were put in boarding schools, they lost all of that. And it's like my father has maybe touched me 3 or 4 times in my life. And that's very, very common for women of my generation, and men too, that they had fathers who were just like, you know, rigid and stoic and, you know, sort of like almost a stereotype, which comes out of boarding school, not out of traditional life. And I think the loss of language was one of the most in addition to disease, because many, many children died in these places, because some of them were built in sort of lowland places where no one had lived before, because it was dangerous. You know, people knew not to live in a place like that. So every child practically would get wiped out by a swamp fever or something. So lots of the children who survived that experience at boarding school, they recognized that how you survived boarding school was not talking. So you never tell your children anything because that's too dangerous. You don't speak your language. Sometimes you batter your wife because that's how you know, or your children, because that's how you learn to relate, because you were stripped of your natural family. I would say that my father's generation suffered, and the generation before him suffered incredibly from the boarding school experience. It's a suffering that I don't feel like I can only guess, because of course he never talks about it, as most people don't talk about that experience. The one time he tried to talk about it to me, he started to cry and left the room. So those, you know, I'm a 3rd generation alcoholic, and I hold the boarding schools directly responsible for that alcoholism, because if you strip a child of affection and warmth and grow them up, I mean, it's like there's that psychological study they did about the monkeys where they kept them in this tower and they never allowed them to touch anything. And it's like those monkeys were nuts. And it's like that's what boarding school did to our fathers and our grandparents, you know. And so they have managed, you know, I really admire my father for surviving, you know.
Oh, I'd like to comment too, because see, we're a little bit, what happened to the indigenous people in the United States, we call it the South 48 or outside, because Alaska, there's a Canada in between, but anyhow, it was very traumatic, and it's people in their 50s is when it started in Alaska in their 40s and 50s. And even 60s, it was
Well, it
even
didn't
the,
until the mid-70s. They
No,
were
I mean
taking
the-
children from their homes.
well, they did prior to
Yeah,
that
up
too.
to the mid-70s.
And even, okay, we probably started in my mother's age. And we were interviewing people from across the bush because we plan on an Alaskan Indigenous Human Rights Tribunal for the purpose of drawing genocide charges. And what we have found with these boarding home or schools, or the mission schools, or the government schools, is that in some cases, children were killed in front of the other children to serve as an example. They were beaten. Many of the children never came home. They would run through the villages, the government or whoever came to pick the kids up, I assume it was the government, chasing these little kids from age 5. And they did not return. They had to spend their whole school life in these schools. They come home maybe in the summertime. So many of them were sexually abused, not just only the girls, but the boys too. And when they became parents, since they had no parental training, they didn't know how to become parents. And now we're finding they are becoming the abusers. They were trained very well by the schools. And so what, we were absolutely shocked, and when we're going through and we're interviewing our people on every facet of their lives, because we're finding more and more horror stories, and it has to stop. That's what's causing problems. And it's just like in Nazi Germany when during World War II, when all of these kids, they took them away from their parents and put them in these little schools, you know, to train them right at an early age. Well, wasn't too many more years later, all of these kids were just raising hell in the streets, being horrible. So Hitler says, give them back to the folks. Let them train these kids. We're not doing a very good job. We can't do what a parent does.
Can I interrupt, because I really want to hear Susan read poetry, and it's getting kind of late. So can I sort of get
one little comment to what you had said about, you know, the thing in the southwest part of the United States, and then blaming Indian people and the rats and that. It just sounded awfully familiar to the little green monkeys in Africa in terms of AIDS.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
And the incredible bullshit that they tried to run down about the Haitians
Yes.
traveling from Haiti to Africa, like those poor people got the money, and why would they go to Africa? And they're dying on the shores of Jamaica and Cuba and South Florida is where they're trying to go, but suddenly they're going back and forth to Africa. And this is how AIDS got over, you know, was transmitted to the United States, because the Haitians traveled back and forth. And then some of the gay tourists come down to Haiti to sleep with boys, and they brought it back to New York and San Francisco. Real strange, you know?
Well, see, one of the things that I think is important to remember is that many of the people who are in charge of the government are virulently homophobic. Hoover was one of them. Now remember how much power Hubert Hoover, who was gay himself, had. So what I see happening is that at some point the government, on Jesse Helms. I mean, I've been taken onto the congressional floor by Jesse Helms and, talked about what a terrible person I am. I mean, I didn't expect to be called up in that context, but it was interesting. You can hear Jesse Helms and when Hoover was alive, both of them will say publicly that all queer people should be killed. Okay, so if you hear them say this in public, that makes perfect sense that they would decide, let's make this really nasty vaccine in our little laboratories and infect gay men with it. It's not hard to do that, and boom, we'll get rid of them all. What they didn't understand, because homophobia prevents people from understanding this, is how many men who are straight are really not very straight, and how much passing back and forth between sexuality people do without ever claiming it. And
You think they really cared? I mean, do you seriously believe
they care now. They didn't realize, I don't think, the consequences of what would happen.
Because they also experimented on soldiers.
Yeah, and convicts and mental hospital
Black
incarcerated.
people,
Yeah.
People of color, Asians.
There's even talk about them shooting some stuff in the subways of New York.
Yes.
I mean, and over South
In the
Florida. they were
subways.
shooting-
And look
Dropping
at how
stuff
they make
over San
vaccines.
Francisco.
They make it from animals. Do you realize today we're getting cases of hoof and mouth disease, brain
In
rot?
people.
I believe
In
it.
people.
I believe it.
Yes.
I wanted to just say one thing about using people as experimental animals. At the end of the 19th century and into the first part of the 20th century, when women had problems, they would excise their clitoris or give them a hysterectomy or remove their ovaries or do something to control their sexuality because the male medical establishment was so fascinated by women's bodies and their sexuality, and they did all of these things to try to understand this and using women and experimenting on them to try to control the results of their repression of women. And it just really strikes a chord with me to hear you talk about using the bodies of people who are not white males for experimental purposes, because all women can't come in this category.
Okay, we would now like to hear Susan Harjow's poetry selections.
No. There's a poem I was going to stop reading that I wrote on the eve of the quincentenary, but that seems somehow appropriate after all of this tonight. And this one's dedicated to Columbus, you know all about him, and to Custer. I was so happy a couple of years ago, together with my Cheyenne brother, Ben Nighthorse Campbell, to get by law a memorial to our Indian heroes and ancestors at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and to change the name of the National Battlefield Monument by dropping the name of Custer, because it was the only thing in the national parks system for battlefields that was named after an individual, and of course the only one named after the loser. It's also dedicated to Sheridan, another one of the guys on the statues all over America, a hero who used to say the only good Indian's a dead one. And at the Sand Creek Massacre, there were two things that the Colorado volunteers were chanting. One was after Sheridan, the only good Indian's a dead one, and the other was after Chivington, Colonel Chivington of the Colorado Volunteers, who had been asked in a public meeting 2 weeks before the Sand Creek Massacre when you say, do you want all the hostile Cheyennes killed, do you even mean the women and children? And he said yes, and they said the babies, the children, and he said yes, nits make lice. And so the two things that were chanted were nits make lice and the only good Indian. These people hated us so much that they made a special bullet for us that would kill Cheyennes, Lakotas, and Arapahoes, and the buffalo. It was a 45-70, and I don't know if you're hunters or gatherers. It's a big damn bullet, folks. And it's about this big when loaded, and it had a special magnesium load, which was really the precursor to napalm, and it would explode on impact, so it would cut in half a Cheyenne or an Arapaho or a Lakota person, and it would quarter a buffalo. I received a bunch of these from a friend who knows I like to have bullets and wear them just in case and out of historic inhibition. So I received those on this one day when I was starting this poem, and on the same day I received news that for the third decade in a row, our Indian teenagers had the highest suicide rate of all segments of American society. And so it's really about internalizing oppression, and that there are a lot of things to be upset about, and this was sort of a quick view of the past 500 years, and thinking about how many dead young Indians all living Indians know. This is also dedicated to John Wayne for exceedingly obvious reasons, and all such heroes of yesteryear. It's called Jumping Through the Hoops of History. 10 little, 9 little, 8 little Indians, 7 little sick little live baby Indians. Poor little me, little you, little Indians, the only good Indians, a dead one. A lot of young Indians got dead in the 80s, just like the 70s and 60s, both 19 and 1800s, and all the other hundreds since 1492. A sucker's numbers game over the sale of the centuries, with 99-year leases and 1-cent treaties with disappearing ink on the bottom line, signed by gilt-eyed odds makers whose smart money bet on 0 redskins by halftime. In the fourth quarter, when this century turned on us, we were down to 250 thou in the U.S., from the 50 million who were here, but who just didn't hear about the lost Italian lurching his way from Spain, with scurvy-covered sailors and yellow-fevered priests, at least 1,000 points of blight and plague, in 3 wooden boxes marked India or Bust, and in gold we trust. Columbus washed upon our shores, praising paradise on earth, and kinder, gentler people who fixed them dinner but laughed so hard at these metal-headed tiny white men that they fell to their knees. We please them, dear diary, Columbus wrote home. They think we're gods. So the Knights of the Lost Boats spread syphilis and the word of the one true gods, and planted hundreds of flags of the one true kings, and sang their sacred 3G song, A, B, C, D, G, 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 glory, God, and gold, gold, gold. Rub-a-dub-dub, anemia tub. Rub-a-dub-dub, a pinta tub. Rub-a-grub-grub, native gold and lands. Rub-a-chop-chop, native ears and hands. Rub-a-dub-dub, Santa Maria sub. Rub-a-rub-rub, Indians out 8 million by 1500, or thereabouts. Meanwhile, back in the land of wicked queens and fairy tales, serfs were sewing and owing the churches and paying dues to the papal store, all for the promise of the kingdom of heaven, starving and dying to make it to that pearly door. The Inquisition kings reeked peasant blood money, but wanted more than those in robes could rob from the poor. So the captains of invention designed the missions to go forth and mine with tools of destruction. to kill the time. So Cristobal Colon led the chorus in the same old song, Kyrie, Kyrie, Kyrie eleison, a new world beat for average savages who didn't change their tune but were bound by chains of office and staked out to pave the yellow brick road at invasion's high noon. And wizards in satin read their rites in Latin, Kyrie, Kyrie, Kyrie requiremento. And a lot of young Indians got dead, as was, by God, their right, to the sound of death songs in the night. And Amerigo begat the beautiful, and the Bibles grew, and the bullets flew, and the pilgrims gave thanks, and carved up turkeys in other people's lands. And Mrs. Governor Stuyvesant bowled with 10 bloody skulls, and begat up against the wall streets and shopping malls on hundreds of mounds. And the 7th Cavalry prayed and passed the ammunition, and loaded Gatling guns 100,000 times, and shot off extra special 45-70s for any Indians or buffalo between Europe and Manifest Destiny. Meanwhile, in most of Indian country, no one heard about the Iron Horse, or the Gold Whores, or the maggots in the Black Hills with no trespassing signs, or what's yours is homestake mines, but that's what they call balling the jack. Then it was too late, about a quarter till midnight, and us without a second hand to tell the times were a-changing. So we jumped through the hoops of history on mile-high tightropes without a net, with no time to look back or back out, with no time to show off or cry out, look, Mom, no hands, no hands, no hands. And the calendar was kept by numbers of sand creeks and washita's and wounded knees and Acoma mesas and hundreds of army blankets of wool and smallpox, and a lot of chiefs who made their marks no longer able to thumb their way home, where X marked the spots on their babies. And Pocahontas haunted England, singing, ring a rosy, ashes, ashes, all fall dead. And a lot of fences got built around a lot of hungry people who posed for a lot of catlins, who shot their fronts and snapped their backs, just say commodity cheese, please. And a lot of Indians got moved and removed, relocated and dislocated from sea to shining sea, from A to Z, from spacious skies to Fort Renos, from purple mountains to Oklahoma, from vision quests to long walks, from stronghold tables to forks in the road, from rocks to hard places, from high water to hell, from frying pans to melting pots, from clear blue streams to Coke. And we got beads, and they got our scalps, and we got horses, and they got our land, and we got treaties, and they got to break them, and we got reservations, and they got to cancel them, and we got Christian burials, and they got to dig us up, and they got America, and America got us, and they got a home where Indians don't roam. Now follow the bouncing cannonball, and they got a home where Indians don't roam. And a lot of young Indians got dead, and those were the glory days. And we learned the arts of civilization, reciting the great white poets, "Oh, little Sioux or Japanese, oh, don't you wish that you were me?" Singing the great white songs, onward Christian soldiers, marching as to war, to save a wretch like me. Amazing race, amazing race. Sailing down the main stream with Land O'Lakes Butter Maiden and Kickapoo Joy Juice role models for good little Indian girls and boys. And we got chopped meat, and we got buffalo. And we got oil well murders, and they got black gold heirs. And they got museums, and we got in them. And they got us under glass, and we got to guide them. And they got the Kansas City Chiefs, and we got a 14,000-man BIA. And we got pickup trucks, and they got our names for campers, and they got rubber tomahawks, and we got to make them. And they got to take us to lunch, and we got to eat it. And they got richer, and we got poorer, and we got stuck in their cities, and they got to live in our countries. And they got our medicines, and we got to heal them, and we got sick, and they got, well, everything. And we got to say please, and thank you, and good morning, America. You're welcome, y'all come and have a nice hemisphere. Then all of a sudden a new day dawned and America yawned and the people mumbled something about equality and the quality of life, some big deal to seal the bargain. And Jack and Jill went to the hill to fetch some bills to save us. And the United Snakes of America spoke in that English only, forked-tongue way about cash on the barrelhead, hand over fist, in exchange for Indian homes on the termination list. And bankers and lawyers and other great white sharks made buyers market killings when war chiefs made their marks. And a lot of Indians packed their bags in Old Pond for fun with Dick and Jane and bussing with blondes, for a bleached-out, whitewashed American morn, while we were just trying to live and get born. And a lot of young Indians got dead in America's two big wars, and the little ones they tried to hide like the Me lies and other white lies, and the millions on the great nation's main streets with holes in their pockets and tombstones for eyes. You see, America was busy lunching and punching clocks in each other, don't tell, and pushing paper in each other, do tell, and loving and leaving Cabbage Patch latchkey kids in the middle of the road and nowhere, where everything got touched but their hearts, where money bought the love they were worth. And America's daddy and mommy looked up from their desks, out from their ovens, over their shoulders, behind the times, down their noses, and right before their eyes, but just out of sight, behind flashlights in abandoned buildings, through cracks in the walls, and in the halls of boarding schools. A lot of young Indians got dead too. Girls with bullets, booze, and Lysol for boyfriends, boys with nooses and razor blades for cold comfort, and a few grandmas and grandpas on their last legs anyway. And we who were left behind sang songs for the dead and dying, for the babies to stop crying, for the burned out and turned out, for the checked out and decked out. Ain't that just like 'em, we said over cold coffee and hot tears, forgetting themselves dead, forgetting to tell us goodbye, forgiving America no 2-week notice, forgiving America with their bodies. Ain't that just their way to gather us up and put us down? Gee, kids really do the darnest things, like get themselves dead, like a lot of them did. Just yesterday and today, and a lot of young Indians got dead, faster than they could say tomorrow. Oh, say, can't you see, they learned America's song and dance. From the rocket's red glare to God shed his light on thee. They read America's history, where they weren't or were only bad news. They laughed when President Rip Van Reagan told the Russians the U.S. shouldn't have humored us. They passed when Senator Slender Reed said, this is the best deal for your land. Find another country or play this hand. They learned the lessons about Columbus in child-proof, ocean blue rhymes, along with other white boy hero signs of the times. They saw the ships sailing again, and a future as extras in movies where Indians don't win. They knew they were about to be discovered again in someone else's lost and found mind, in an old world bush quail, new age snake oil rerun, as much fun as the first scent of those sailors, fresh from the hold, exhaling disease, inhaling gold. And a lot of young Indians escaped just in time to miss the good wishes and cheer. Have a happy, have a merry, have a very nice Columbus year. 10 little, 9 little, 8 little Indians, 7 little sick little live baby Indians. Poor little me, little you, little Indians, the only good Indians are dead one. Because I don't want to leave you with that, do one more that came to mind because of someone in a Buffalo meeting. One Lakota man sang, you know, that dance that the Buffalo do, they're doing it again, now that we're raising them. The Buffalo do a specific ceremony. They, when the sunflowers get exactly so tall, and it's a uniform thing in comparison to the buffalo, the buffalo dance counterclockwise around them until all their yellow petals are gone and all the brown in the middle is gone. And they line up tallest to the shortest buffalo. And I really like that. So before a performance that the band I manage, Red Thunder, was going to do out at the Roxy Theater at LA in February, and I was doing poetry, and a bunch of other people were talking and committing other crimes. I improvised this and then later wrote it down. It's called Songs Who Sing. There are songs who sing themselves. They start from the heartbeat of creation, thunder medicine, echoing, echoing, echoing through canyons of time. The songs who sing themselves scale mountains, then fly from world to world. Fire medicine, sounding, breathing, flying through lightning and shooting stars. The songs who sing themselves swim oceans, then come down with the gentle night rain, with the morning dew, with mist on clear blue lakes. The songs who sing paint warriors on watch for blood at dawn. The songs who sing wail like mourners, mourners laying their children down in the sunset. The songs who sing heal Mother Earth in the joy of birth and skip beats with rattles and sighs. The songs sing the evening prayers for grandfather cedars who talk in the night. The songs sing the midday prayers for grandmother moon and her circles of life. The songs sing themselves for the buffalo to dance, for the buffalo to dance, for the buffalo to dance with the sunflowers again. The buffalo are dancing. The buffalo are dancing again, and the songs are still singing. The songs are still singing. The songs are still singing. The songs are still singing for you.
I'd like to thank you all for attending the forum tonight. And at this time, we would like to present our panel with some gifts to show our appreciation.